to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss the 2025 Wimbledon Championships and focus a little bit on some of the qualities of the champions and finalists, but potentially some other themes that came up as well. So on the men's side, Jannik Sinner won his first Wimbledon title, defeating Carlos Alcaraz 4-6, 6-4, 6-4, 6-4. And on the women's side, Iga Świątek won her first Wimbledon title, defeating Amanda Anisimova 6-love, 6-love. And there's a lot of themes that we will dive into on both sides. I think that there were certain themes that overlapped and certain themes maybe unique to certain players or finalists. Wanted to see kind of where you wanted to start things in terms of the tournament.
I think let's start with the women's side. But before we jump into that, Josh, let's take a moment to mention our sponsor for this episode, Go Sport. So as a listener of the Tennis IQ podcast, you can get 10% off Go Sport products at gosport.com. So it's GEAU sport.com by using the discount code TennisIQ10. That's all one word. So visit gosport.com and be sure to check out their selection of premium gear bags and for tennis and pickleball. Josh and I both use their bags, and they're really fantastic. Again, use the discount code TennisIQ10 to get 10% off all products at gosport.com. So I think if we look at the final first, Josh, as I was seeing the score and the way Amanda Anisimova was talking about how she played, and you can just watch how she played, it brought to mind something we don't often talk about. I rarely mention this to the players I work with because I don't necessarily want them to know that they could get that bad. But there's a catastrophe model of anxiety and performance in sports psychology. And maybe just to give some background on this, a more basic model might be, I think it's called the Yerkes-Dodson model, which is basically an inverted U. And what that inverted U graph is showing that as arousal increases, intensity increases, performance level gets better and better, but only to a point. And then as arousal continues to increase, anxiety, then the performance decreases. And the inverted U theory is a basic way of understanding the relationship. But it doesn't really hold for everybody. And so after that, there was another theory to explain it called, for short, IZOF, but it merely means, it stands for individual zones of optimal functioning. And that curve looks different for different people. Some people might actually perform well at low levels of arousal. Some need higher. Also may differ depending on your sport. So someone in golf or tennis may have a different profile than, say, someone who is a rugby player or a linebacker on an NFL team. They might have a completely different profile. But then there's another aspect to it and we've certainly talked about this topic of anxiety in sport, which can be both physical and cognitive. And they generally work together. And when we are feeling something in our bodies, we may interpret it as a threat. So they kind of cycle back and forth. And this model says that those two things can get so bad, in a way, so out of control, that your performance could actually take a catastrophic drop. So we often like to think of like, well, my level is, let's say I'm a 4 or 5 player. On any given day, I'm probably somewhere between, a 4.3 and a 4.9, depending. And when we're playing and we're not playing our best, there's this idea of regression to the mean. Usually we won't play so well for a little while, but then we generally come back to our level. And what this is saying is that, or this model shows that doesn't always happen. You can actually continue to get worse, right? So if you think 4.3 is your floor, actually it might be lower. it might be 3-5 to a certain degree, or you're making so many errors that that's where you are, right? Your strokes look good, but and I think this is a little bit of what happened with Amanda Anisimova. So certainly fatigue from the semifinal played a part. Josh, she noted that, but that would also go into this piece. It was a big stage for her. She had never even come close to getting to a Grand Slam final. I think you had a quote earlier how she noted that she kind of froze out there with the nerves, but the fatigue was a part of it. So that's it. Just made me think of this theory, Josh, that how you can actually play really, really poorly because of what you're feeling in your body and what you're thinking. And the surprising thing for me, I know a lot of tennis fans don't like this, is that she didn't take a bathroom break at the end of the first set. When we look at, recommendations for dealing with the catastrophe model when you're in the moment, basically you need to take a break and do some breathing exercises. Just try to down-regulate yourself. And I wouldn't have expected Amanda to know that. Maybe her team could have recommended it. Maybe they did recommend it and she waved them off. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And to me, whether fans like this or not, this would have been her doing it for herself, which I think is the right way to do it. It's not gamesmanship. And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, how do we know that Amanda Anisimova is ever going to reach another Grand Slam final? This might have been her one and only chance. You have to do everything you can to win that match, obviously within the rules and ethically. And the rules allow for a bathroom break. Again, I know lots of people have criticized Iga for taking breaks after first sets, but you lose a set 6-0 like that, it deserves the opportunity to leave the court and then come back with some fresh eyes. Not obviously for a tremendous amount of time, but so I guess I'll leave it there, Josh. Maybe kind of have you pick up on your thoughts on what happened with Anisimova and the catastrophe piece and other aspects of that.
Yeah, I think that the catastrophe model accurately reflects what happened to her. I think there were different factors at play. I think fatigue is definitely part of it. I mean, for any player to get to a Grand Slam final, that means they've won 6 matches, right? 6 matches over the course of less than 2 weeks at that point. And not to mention her semifinal match was against Aryna Sabalenka, who's no easy foe. So she had to face Sabalenka in 3 sets in the heat. And I think especially for London, it was quite hot during that period of time. So it makes sense that she was fatigued. Again, she hadn't been to that stage of the tournament before, so there was certainly a physical component, but also there clearly was, nerves were clearly at play. Nerves and anxiety were clearly at play, which again is normal, right? When somebody's in their first final, and we add in the elements of Wimbledon, right? The all the history around it, all the royal box, everything that surrounds Wimbledon, and sort of the prestige there, and there's a lot of bright lights on somebody in that moment. And Iga's obviously been to and won many Grand Slam finals. So Iga's in a very different situation. Yes, this was her first time at a Wimbledon final, but it's again she's been really a legend of the sport in recent years. So it's a little bit of a different situation. So I think that there were different factors sort of contributing to this, and unfortunately for her, she got off to a slower start. She lost that first set 6-love. I agree with what you're saying about the bathroom break, because I think that it's a way to, for your benefit, not to disrupt the opponent, to help you hopefully reset. To I think that walk to the bathroom can be helpful in itself to maybe help you just kind of physically, move, and not obviously you're moving within the match, but sort of move in your own. Yeah, I think just that movement piece can be helpful, but even in the bathroom itself, right? You could splash some water on your face. Djokovic has talked about looking at himself in the mirror and sort of having conversations with himself in the mirror in moments like that as well. I think actually at Wimbledon a few years back against Federer, and I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And as you said, right, players have been criticized for it. Iga, I know, has gotten criticism. Tsitsipas has gotten criticism for it. I think when it becomes an issue is when players make it too much of a habit that they're going to be going maybe too often, and when they really extend it. When they're extending it for too long and their opponent is just sitting there waiting for them, it's first of all, it's easy for their opponent to get cold in situations like that, and I think that then the intention of it shifts from something about you in terms of helping you reset to trying to disrupt your opponent. But I think that's definitely good guidance in terms of being able to use that time to help you reset. And then, at a certain point in the second set, especially after you lose the first game and the second game, it can become easy to, instead of focusing on yourself and focusing on your process and how do I want to play and what's my game plan in my A game, and maybe do I need to make adjustments, and what areas of my opponent's game can I attack? It's easy to start really focusing on the score. And we talk a lot on this podcast about focusing on your process and trying to play the right way. But it's obviously always easy to get distracted by the score, right? And the score and winning and losing, and especially when you're down 6-love, 1-0, 2-0, 3-0 in the second set, it's easy to think, okay, well, I don't want to lose this 6-love, 6-love. And the fear and anxiety relating to that can start to become overwhelming, which again can lead to that catastrophe. So I think there's a lot there. I think to her credit, I think she really handled a tough situation quite well, in terms of her remarks right after the match and in the press conference, which, by the way, is not an easy thing to do. For anyone that plays the sport, having to, having to give remarks and comments about a match directly after the match to millions of people is not easy. We saw in the French Open final how Sabalenka said things that she regretted and she didn't mean right after the final against Coco Gauff. And, later she walked up, to her credit, she walked it back and apologized. But I think it's tough, right? When emotions are heightened, when you're frustrated, when you're hurt, it's easy to not necessarily handle that moment with the class and the poise that you'd hope for. But to her credit, Anisimova really did, right? Again, losing by the way that she did in a moment like that is it's going to be tough for anybody. So, I think really impressive just how she handled it, and hopefully rather than this being a scar, she can look back at, really a fantastic tournament for her, and not focus so much on that final, but maybe focus on the journey. Last thing I'll say, and I think it's important about her, and is just sort of that journey that she's had. Like, she took 8 months off from the sport, for things relating to mental health, and took a break and came back. And yes, it took her some time to come back, but now to reach a even higher point than she ever reached before that is super impressive. And it shows that she really prioritized that aspect of things. Tennis wasn't everything to her, so she really prioritized herself and taking care of herself, and just an incredible accomplishment to get to this point, in to get to her first Grand Slam final. And I hope she can take a lot of positives out of the tournament and really use it as fuel for the future.
I think we could also all sympathize with what Anisimova went through. we'll go 80-20 rule here, Josh. 80% of us have choked because that's really what it ended up being in that way. A lot of times we talk about a choke being in an important moment, but there are some chokes that just start from the beginning, and you're just bad from the beginning. And it made me think of a couple of finals I played when I was in the 16s, and yeah, it was just bad from the beginning. It never got any better. So I know what that feels like, and it's tough. For me, it actually got me to quit playing tournaments for 6 months to try to figure it out because it was happening repeatedly. I started to create a pattern of that. So I bet everybody, most everybody listening has been through this, and she will be better for it. You come back from it. You mentioned, maybe this being a scar, but I think in some ways we can wear our scars as medals to prove where we've been and where we'll go. I think it'll be very interesting, like it is with a lot of especially in the women's tour, where we see some people get to finals and, is this the new Amanda Anisimova, or is this a great 2-week run? So that remains to be seen. It'd be great to have her be more consistent with her results in this way, because she has a good game. She actually has the kind of game that would typically give Świątek a problem, but just wasn't able to execute that particular day. The win over Sabalenka, obviously fantastic. And Sabalenka, though, had a very interesting quote. I mean, it was sort of very playful at the beginning of the press conference where she was not going to let anybody, get anything out of her. But she said something about how Anisimova was braver at the end. And then she said this, which I thought was very interesting and something for all of us to ponder. She said, "I think I should have been a little bit more brave today. And remember that I'm on the top of the ranking, and I can do that. I think at some point in the match, I forgot about that." And that's interesting, because you wouldn't think of Aryna Sabalenka as someone who isn't going for it, but did she just drop enough intensity that let her opponent take the moment? And it made me think about Dominic Arbati, that episode that we did with him, and talking about when you're playing great players, if you don't take the chance, they will. And at that level, even if you're number one in the world and you're playing Anisimova was the 15th seed, they're good enough. If you give them a chance, they'll take it. And she has the kind of game that does that. So I thought that was interesting, and I would just encourage everybody to be brave on the court. That doesn't mean be reckless and go crazy, but be willing to hit your shots, be willing to take your chances. So I thought that was interesting from Sabalenka, and then I think she's getting ready herself. I think they all are. They're all just like, now let's move on, which I think I really like about today's players, Josh, is no one's really getting overly disappointed or depressed. I mean, they're disappointed, but they're not taking it to the extent of like, we can't recover and move on. Because when we talk about the men's final, I know you want to get into this, basically the bounce back, and I think you wanted to also talk about Świątek and her bounce back.
Yes. I think it is important to look at Świątek's last few years. She was number one in the world for a long period of time, and by a wide margin, right? She was number one. She was dominant on clay in particular, but in terms of the points, she often had quite a gap between her and everybody else in the rankings. So she was the dominant number one player in the world for a long period of time, and then Sabalenka comes in and last year takes that number one throne from her, right? And she's at number two for a while. And then this clay season, she didn't have results at the same level that she's had in the past. And she goes into Wimbledon as the number 8 seed, right? Somebody who's really spent the last few years at number one primarily, and nearly all number one or number two now all of a sudden the number 8 seed. And I think players can react differently to that. I think some players can take that almost as an offense and say, oh, that's not me, or just like we see with UTR. I think a lot of players feel that maybe their UTR or WTN doesn't maybe accurately reflect them. And I think it can be easy to maybe almost like take that as a slight or not use it as fuel or motivation. But I think what we saw from Iga is maybe one of a couple things. Either she was able to use that as a motivation, or but potentially the weight of expectations had faded away. Where when somebody's number one, someone's number two, when someone is defending champion, it's easy to feel, a lot of that there's a lot of expectations on your shoulders. So instead of that, when somebody's ranking has dropped, in a certain way, they're going in with nothing to lose and maybe lower expectations. And it seems like that was part of really why she thrived. But yeah, just want to be able to highlight that comeback that she had from, her ranking dropping significantly, on a surface that, she hasn't won on before. She hasn't, made a deep run like this at Wimbledon. So I think a really impressive comeback on her side. And I think when we talk about the men's side, I think there was, some overlapping themes there, especially with Jannik Sinner in terms of his comeback. But yeah, just really impressive from her to win the way that she did, and also just the resilience that she's shown in terms of coming back from a dip in terms of her ranking, but also in terms of her game to, to really showing everybody the level that she's been able to generate these past few years.
I think you also had a quote from Daria Abramovich about maybe Iga's a change in mindset and attitude post Rome.
Yes, absolutely. So a quote from her, Daria Abramowitz, who's Iga's sports psychology consultant. You often I think always see her in Iga's box along with her coach and physio. And she's been very public. I think in the past and currently, as a primary member of Iga's team. But yeah, she had a quote about sort of this journey that Iga had over these past few months. So here's the quote. Um, a very important time was definitely after the tournament in Rome, when the whole team had several very important, not necessarily pleasant conversations where Iga's attitude changed somewhat. To put it mildly, I'd say she really stepped up her game on the court. She changed her approach to certain issues. She then consistently implemented this at Roland Garros. This work was largely based on changing her beliefs, on building a sense of effectiveness and confidence in her ability to utilize her strengths. So I thought it was interesting that Dario was actually bringing up Roland Garros, where Iga was, I think, certainly the odds makers pick to win the tournament, and she didn't, losing in, I believe, the semifinals. But I think it's almost like that the work that took place before Roland Garros, even though she didn't win it, ended up maybe catapulting her and helping her turn things around for this victory, sort of with everything culminating in this title.
And I think if you look at that semifinal, that was the one where Sabalenka played like on a whole nother level in that third set, right? Zero unforced errors, 6-0.
Six
Right.
love.
So that I don't know that that's anything negative on Iga. I thought, in fact, in that match, she played really well to win that second set and was stepping it up and was impressive. So yeah, some good stuff coming into Wimbledon. So let's transition to the men. Obviously, Jannik Sinner wins his first Wimbledon. Carlos Alcaraz was the defending champion. And I know you had some thoughts, Josh, about Sinner's bounce back after Paris. Obviously, everybody was talking about that, the rematch points. 99% chance of winning for Sinner, doesn't win. Very disappointing. But yeah, talk a little about your thoughts about how Sinner recovered.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, the way that he lost that French Open final where, he'd been up to 2 sets to love. Alcaraz was serving at 3-5, love 40, down 2 sets to 1, right? So had 3 match points against him and down a break. Manages to win that fourth set, and then the fifth set was very back and forth, and then won in a super tiebreaker. But that was obviously a very painful loss for Sinner, right? Having had the chance to win his first French Open title, having lost all these match points. I think it also led to at the time after that final, it was 5 times in a row where he had lost to Alcaraz, which were actually the majority of his losses over the last year and a half were to just Alcaraz. So I think in a lot of ways it must have been painful, really, really painful for him. He's been the dominant world number one, but this one rival has gotten the upper hand, over and over again against him. And especially in the manner that he did, losing match points. And yeah, you brought up the 99% statistic. I think, El País in Spain, their newspaper, showed that, yeah, at that love 40, 3-5, down 2 sets to 1 point, there was only a 1% chance of Alcaraz coming back at that point. And as we know in tennis, you can't run out the clock. There is no clock to run out, right? You have to keep winning points to the end of the match. But Alcaraz managed to find a way to come back there. So I think just like we talked about with Iga's comeback, seeing Sinner's comeback over these last 5 weeks, right? And really the French Open final was only 5 weeks before the Wimbledon final. So to be able to put something that happened so recently behind him in the way that he did, to be in another final against the same opponent 5 weeks later, and an opponent, by the way, who's not only had the 5 match winning streak against Sinner, but also was the had won the last 2 Wimbledons, was the 2-time defending champion. So a lot of things maybe working against him. So I think the fact that he performed the way that he did to win this final in 4 sets just makes it all the more impressive.
It made me think about, and we've mentioned this video in the past, but the Kobe Bryant failure doesn't exist video, because the story continues. And the thing that Sinner and his team did well, they looked at what happened at Roland Garros and they learned from it. People typically say, "Oh, we looked at what we did wrong," but you're also got to look at what you did right. But they learned from that, and then they moved on, and the work continues, the story continues, and the same will be for Carlos Alcaraz, and he's already looking forward now to the hardcourt season. I thought both guys were very positive about the future, and even Alcaraz expressing the fact that he's very proud of his effort. I think Sinner was the same way in Paris. And the journey continues, the story continues for both of them. And when both guys were asked about the rivalry, I really like how they responded, because they both see the positive aspects of the rivalry, that they're pushing each other to be better every time out. And that's what a top player needs. He or she, they need somebody who's down just below them, pushing them to be better. Otherwise, you can be a little bit stale, or it can be harder, perhaps, to figure out why you're working on it. Certainly, Federer and Nadal did that for each other, and then Djokovic joined in, and they did it for Djokovic. They all brought each other to heights that they would not have achieved if they had been alone at the top. This rivalry is beginning, for those of us who are old enough to remember this, it is reminding me of the way Federer and Nadal dominated tennis in the 2000s, really from 06 to 08, 09. Djokovic obviously got involved there with the 08 Australian Open, but the real Djokovic didn't show up until maybe 2011, when he really changed his game. Um, but up until that time, it was really Federer, Nadal, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, and they were only really beating themselves at that point. And it's starting to feel that way. That there's a little bit of a gap between those two and the other guys, and I think you saw it at Wimbledon. The other guys really didn't necessarily hang as well as they could. Of course, Novak Djokovic on a given day can hang with anyone, but I think he's struggling to get through the 5, 6, 7 matches required to win a Grand Slam. And then if you get through those matches, then you're facing either Alcaraz or Sinner, much younger, and right now playing the best tennis in the world. So I love this. I love the fact that these guys are so positive. They conduct themselves really well on the court. We don't see any shenanigans really from either one of them. Maybe on occasion, rare occasion, you might see some little bit of loss of temper, but that's super rare. Otherwise, we see smiles and tempered fist pumps, right? Not too much, and just great tennis. Just the quality, the ball striking. It's great for the game, especially now. I think people were worried about a little bit of what are we gonna do now that the big three has gone? Are we gonna that was a real golden age from really, Federer 03 on, but sort of 05, 06 up until just the last couple of years. What an amazing almost 20 years of tennis. Would we be able to get that? Maybe these guys can do it. Obviously, they have the makings of a great rivalry. Can they stay healthy enough to keep it up? Sinner mentioned that, even at 23, he doesn't think he's reached his peak physically. And I think, if we look at the way strength and conditioning go, he's right. Most men reach their physical peak around 25, 26. So there's still more there. And of course, with recovery methods and nutrition, what obviously Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer all did, they all played deep into their 30s, very high level. There's no reason, if these guys can stay healthy, that we don't see a great rivalry for years from them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in the hard court season. Sinner's obviously been great on the hard courts. Alcaraz appears to be playing well. And so this should be an exciting July, August, September.
Definitely. I think the rivalry that the two of them have, and I think they're sort of stretching their lead on the rest of the field, you could say. That I think that the two of them have, are now, I think, by far and away the two strongest players in the world. And yes, you mentioned, Djokovic on any given day can compete or beat them. I think it's getting tougher and tougher for him to get deep into tournaments. And, he's 38, right? When you're 38 and you're not 22 or 23, like Alcaraz and Sinner, your body's going to respond differently. And that's normal. But I think, it'll be interesting to see how much longer he can compete at the top of the game, which he is. He reached a semifinal here. I think his body seemed to let him down against Sinner, unfortunately. And had it not, potentially he could have, really pushed Sinner there. We'll never know. But that'll be interesting. I think there are a couple other players, whether it's Zverev or Fritz or Draper or, maybe a couple others that can push them on the right day. But I think in general, they are maybe stretching that gap compared to the rest of the field. A couple other things that I think are important to recognize. I think Alcaraz has shown more consistency and discipline. I think in the past he's been, whether fairly or unfairly, criticized for maybe playing lower percentage tennis at moments, playing, riskier, going for more highlight reel shots. I think there is some validity to that. And I think that if you look at Sinner, he does tend to play really high percentage. He plays He tends to, play more cross court. He tends to really play the percentages. He's from a decision making perspective, I think he does a really good job consistently and reminds me a lot of Djokovic in that way. Um, but I think Alcaraz play, does have those elements of risk, adding additional risk, or maybe doing things that seem more low percentage because frankly he can get away with it and he's able to do things on a court that nobody else can really do. I think he has elements of flair and can raise the bar in ways that maybe nobody else can do. I think Sinner does it in a different way and raises the bar in sort of a Djokovic-esque, not missing way of being extremely solid, hitting the ball really hard, probably harder than, I mean, I think, harder than Djokovic, but playing in that sort of high percentage way at an extremely high level. I think Sinner does that, but I think when Alcaraz is at his best, he's playing relatively high percentage, maybe less so than some of the other top players, but adding in certain incredible things that other players don't do. For example, the drop shot, which he has sort of has always been a really big part of his game. And I think by adding it in, in the way that he has, it adds that element of surprise and adds that sort of unpredictability element that other parts of his game really thrive on. And you've seen other players on the men's and women's tour using the drop shot a lot more often now. And junior players, college players using it more too, where in the past it was almost seen as maybe a novelty or a really low percentage shot. And I think in certain ways it still is low percentage, but I think he's changed the game by just showing the versatility of a shot like that. So I think it's interesting, again, as we talk about this rivalry, it's interesting sort of the clash of styles between the solidness and ultimately high percentageness of how Sinner goes about things and the flair of Alcaraz, though I think he, to his credit, has added in more high percentage elements to his own game, and I think that's led to the more consistency that we've seen this year from him. So yeah, just wanted to maybe add that piece in.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I would agree that Sinner is sort of a much like Djokovic in terms of directional rules and high percentage tennis and just, but he hits the ball harder. Ben Shelton made that observation as well, that it's almost like two levels above everybody else. And it's very difficult to deal with, especially on a grass court. So, and then, the thing about Alcaraz is this is something that I think others have seen from him, but it's just his kindness and humility as a player. And one incident that happened at Wimbledon was, someone had fainted in the crowd and Alcaraz grabbed a water bottle, brought it over, connected actually with that woman later, who said she is now his number one fan because of something like that. I mean, that's just being so human when I don't think everybody would have done that. And it's hard to know because a lot of us also sort of fall into the bystander profile where we kind of expect somebody else to step up. So there's a good article in The Guardian entitled "The Kindness of Carlos. Fans and former coaches hail always humble Alcaraz." So I'd highly recommend people to read that short profile. It was about 4 or 5 days ago. So today's, as we're recording, July 16th, it would have been like the 12th or the 11th of July. So both these guys, I think, are really easy to root for. Back in the 2000s, there was definitely Federer camp, Nadal camp, and they didn't like each other. Like the players seemed to be okay with each other, but the fans didn't. And I haven't sensed that yet, Josh, like that there's a real adversarial relationship between Alcaraz fans and Sinner fans. It just seems like we're all more or less appreciating what's going on, which is great. I think that's how it should be. We don't need to be so dogmatic about one particular player over another. We can be happy for both of them because they're both great guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, in the period of time after the match, and I think we saw something similar at the French Open. I think both of them, yeah, seem to reflect on that rivalry that they've been building, and there's that mutual respect and it's sort of a confidence, I think, from both of them that they'll be back on the stage, right? That this, that they've obviously both won quite a bit, especially for their age and sort of where they're at in their careers. And it seems like with each of them, okay, they obviously don't like to lose, but there's sort of that understanding that, hey, I'll be back here and I'm going to learn from this, I'm going to grow from this, and I'm going to be back. And I think that demonstrates a certain confidence, right? That shows a certain confidence to yourself and to your peers on tour that, you know what? Okay, losing hurts, but I know that I have what it takes mentally and physically to get back.
Yeah. So it's very reminiscent of even a Nadal who talked about personal satisfaction being, the winning and the losing. Somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. But when you play with great attitude and you give it all you have, whether you win or lose, the feeling, he said, for him was the same. And I think that's what allowed him to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And I see that with these guys as well, because that enables you to let the story continue instead of getting wrapped up too much in your past. So, well, thank you, Josh. I think that was a good recap of the kind of the mental performance side of Wimbledon 2025. So that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.